What is up,
Hello.
guys? We're back with episode 2 on the podcast, me and Keaton both. And today we're going to be diving more deeply into what we do in the NIL company in NX1 and really dive into why we're entering the high school space, what NIL is, and why we're choosing to really focus on the high school atmosphere rather than the college, as we're seeing a new information and new spikes in the high school atmosphere. And I'll just pivot over to Keaton and let him explain even more.
Yeah, so we just wanted to first thank you guys for the massive support we've received from the first
Hmm.
episode. As of right now, we're so excited to continue this journey. Yeah, let's just get right into it. We have some fun things planned for today's episode, and we hope you stick to the end.
Yeah, just a little plug in first though. If you guys are listening to the pod and you're not already following our Instagram, NX1 Company on Instagram, you'll see everything we're doing over there. We're actually going to be posting highlight clips throughout the week of the previous episode, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then our podcasts are going to come out every Sunday. So just a little reminder up there, and yeah, let's get straight into really what NIL is and what we're about.
Yeah, let's do it. Also, on top of that, we're also adding a Facebook soon, so go follow that as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
So very exciting. Yeah. So do you want to start out by defining the NIL term then, or
Yeah, let's do it. So, for those of you who don't know what NIL is or haven't really watched the first podcast where we gave like a simple overview of what it was, NIL is name, image, and likeness. And basically, going in depth further into that, if you've seen Caitlin Clark on cereal boxes, that would be an endorsement. If you see a grocery store or another company like maybe State Farm with Chris Paul and how Chris Paul endorses State Farm, they use his name, they use him in videos and advertise. That would also be an endorsement. I mean, you see player jersey sales. That's going to be their jersey, their name, their image. And so it's just basically anything that a player might have rights to in terms of their name and image and likeness. And in the NCAA before 2021, all those jersey sales are going directly to the schools. They profit off of the student. The student never really benefits too much. Since 2021, since NIL came out, times have changed. California schools first implemented it, and then it expanded across the Midwest and East Coast. NCAA is having a little bit of trouble, capitalizing and making sure that like they have controlled players in terms of what they're making. And now, starting in 2023, high schoolers are now able to enter the NIL markets and really profit off of their own name, image, and likeness. It's totally new, and I'll let Keaton really dive into why it's so spectacular and like why this is happening, and then how the high school landscape is going to work since it's like just coming out and we're really diving into it. So yeah, Keaton, on you.
yeah, so I mean, just to, piggyback on top of what he said about what NIL is, it's in a simplistic world and term, it is basically how athletes can make money, monetize themselves. And so
Yeah.
in the past, like you was saying, most collegiate athletes, they couldn't make any money. So what they ended up doing was, well, we're giving you a full ride scholarship. So that's kind of
Hmm.
like the exchange there. But the problem was,
Yeah.
is that athletes weren't really happy with, being in those leagues for sometimes 3 to 4 years, not having any money. Most of these athletes don't, that's their life. I mean, their
Yeah.
job is to, you know, eat, sleep, and breathe sports. And so
Hmm.
when you don't have opportunities to do side jobs or make money, it can be hard to live off that. And so I think that's really where it stemmed from.
Yeah.
And so it's super interesting. It's definitely been like something athletes have always wanted. The NCAA finally gave in because athletes were leaving quicker or finding other ways to make professional leagues, for example, like the G League or whatever. And this was a good way
Yeah.
to get athletes to that next level. But I
Hmm.
mean, more on the high school level, I think the whole, I mean, this might be very theoretical, but I mean, it definitely makes sense that, the level probably transitioned over to the high school saying, oh, if we can do this on a collegiate base nationally, then there's probably a good shot that it'll work at the high school level as well. And I think also on top of that, the athletes wanted a piece of the money pie, right? So it was like the whole idea that, you know, why can only college athletes make money when I'm an athlete too? I
Yeah, a
don't know if
little
you want to
bit.
touch a bit on that.
Yeah, a little bit more in depth about that, piggybacking off of Keaton. Going back into the college landscape, you'll see with how NIL is operating, you'll see that college football players are kind of making the rise of NIL as you have the NBA prospects. They're pretty much only staying in college for 1 year. So NIL really isn't a big deal for them. They're going to make a lot of money through their in the pro league. So whether they're going to Europe or whether they're playing in the NBA, they only need to stay in college for 1 year. But if you look at sports like like football or some of the other ones, they have to stay in college for 3 years before they're eligible to be drafted. And so NIL becomes a bigger part of the play in those categories. And that's really why you see with football, different players really using NIL to their advantage in terms of which schools they're moving and staying for their 3 years. And really pivoting backing off of that, that's kind of how the high school landscape is looking like. I mean, you don't see players really anymore in any league come directly from high school to the pros. And obviously, you're staying there from your freshman to senior season until you go to college. So, unlike college freshmen in the NBA, I mean, who are prospects for the NBA, where they might be leaving after 1 year, every student's forced to stay for their entire 4 years. So they might as well try to capitalize off of their name, image, and likeness on that standpoint. And so, coming back down to the high school, like Keaton was saying, if it's already working in the NCAA and in the college landscape, they might as well try to do it in the high school landscape and really capitalize on their earnings before they even get to college. And kind of referring back to our last episode, in episode one, the beginning, we were talking about how different students really need to get part-time jobs in high school in order to make sure that they can get to that next level in college, or even if they're pivoting and going to like a D3 or D2 schools with those offers, they don't get scholarships. Only the D1s and like the top 17% of athletes are going to get those high priority D1 offers, full rides. And so any money that a student can make at their time in high school to either go to that D3 school and still be able to become like net even and not be at a loss playing as an athlete, or even accepting those semi scholarships that's not going to cover the entire tuition and still having that amount of money to really get that college education while playing your sport. Anything really counts, and I think that's what matters. And Keen, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I wanted to just add like the other important aspect to think about in terms of NIL and why it's so good for the athletes is that the only thing guaranteed in sports is that nothing's guaranteed. And so,
Yeah, nothing is guaranteed.
I mean, any day you could, make your last lap and you could tear your ACL. I mean, and then your
Yeah,
your career's done. And for most people, that means that they lose scholarships or they don't get another chance. And so, if these athletes through and for them to be able to go to like that next level, sometimes like when those things happen, it's hard for the schools to keep the scholarship for the athlete. So
yeah,
most of the times athletes either transfer or they just drop out, and that's a tough pill to swallow. I think
yeah.
that's something that's really helped a lot of people who, even if they're hurt, they can still do some NIL aspects to it as well. It's not just like, oh, okay, once you're done, you're done. But if you have like a big social media following, I mean, they'll want to keep you around because, keeps media there.
100%. I mean, you'll see students all over the place now who maybe tear their ACL or out on an injury, a freak game injury that wasn't supposed to happen. But they've grown their social media enough to where they maybe have 100,000 followers or subscribers, whatever the different media platform is. And schools keep them around just because, I mean, more publicity for the school, the better. And if these guys can be the somewhat ambassadors or spokesperson for the school to the many different high school athletes or middle school athletes trying to get to that high school, or high school athletes trying to get to that college, it's in the college's best interest to keep you around on that scholarship to make sure that you're bringing in the revenue in terms of getting people over here. And so that's an aspect of NIL that a lot of people don't talk about, is that if you can perfect your branding, perfect your marketing, really develop your own social pages and make yourself a quote unquote influencer, but not really an influencer, just like an ambassador for your school, that will keep you around and that makes you marketable. I think at the end of the day, NIL is really teaching players about their marketability. And that's something that they didn't really have before. It was really the school that was marketing them as like they're like almost having ownership over the player, like they're
Yeah, it's
with
like
us.
like they were like their product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, where
But
now it's
now
kind of even.
the players are now the product of themselves. So I think that's the big change
Yeah,
and the
it's
big
definitely creating
movement.
more individuals. And like you said, I like the word influencer.
Yeah.
They're all kind of becoming mini influencers. And,
Hmm.
what they do with that is completely up to them. And I think it's definitely hard for the NCAA because, they're losing control over an aspect of the game. And so I think from that end, I definitely understand it. But I think, like, by and large, like, it definitely helps more people than hurts people. So,
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And even at the same time, the NCAA before 2021 was all about like really captivating the most revenue out of their players. And they could say they care about the players, but in reality, it's whatever's making them the money. And so they could say all they want about caring about the players, but at the end of the day, they're basically tools for them to make a profit. But at the same time, in this new era of NIL, not only is NIL helping these players like market themselves, but it's also teaching them a lot about how businesses works and how like you need to network with different professionals. And so, like we were talking about on the previous podcast of how when you're getting these part-time jobs or working as an athlete, you don't have time to get those internships or whatever in order to develop those business skills. NIL in itself is teaching these players how to develop those business personnel. Sales is a big thing. NIL is basically sales on the athlete part, but it's teaching you lifelong skills that you're going to use in the corporate world a lot, or even if you're trying to start your own endeavor. And so I think that's a big thing with NIL. And then how about let's get into like really why high school is becoming this new NIL big place and how it's triggering down from colleges.
yeah, I think the interesting thing, I don't know exactly how the whole high school movement started. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm aware that it was probably somewhere in California, Southern
Mm-hmm.
California, probably.
Yeah.
And I think it really started with, I think a really good example of this is like Bronny. I think Bronny James, obviously his dad being
Yeah.
LeBron, he does know a lot about, he's very smart with business decisions. And so Bronny was from a freshman year marketing himself, and kind of like saying like these athletes are learning how to conduct business. And that's very appealing to, different companies. So like, for me and JR, if we ended up wanting to work somewhere after college, it's in the past, it was easier because we had time to do internships and like he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But now these athletes have, written experience of saying, look, I've sat down, I've talked to different people, I've gotten deals done. And so
Yeah.
like if you want to hire me and get this deal done, like I'm gonna do the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For those 9% of athletes who don't make it to the next level.
Yeah. To really develop that skill, even starting at the high school space.
Exactly.
That's the
Yeah.
big thing. With college NIL, you can develop those skills maybe while you're there for a year or two playing your sport. But if you get a freak injury or something happens, you're done with that scholarship. That NIL deal might be gone too, and you maybe only had like a year to really develop those skills. If you can progress that throughout your time as a freshman to senior in high school and then go to college, maybe continue your NIL landscape or even decide, you know what? I've already cemented myself with this brand. Maybe it's Nike, maybe Adidas, maybe a sleeve company for football, something else, an apparel company, but maybe you cemented yourself with them as an ambassador to the point where you can work with them throughout college and not even have that NIL deal, but just like a part-time job that you can continue after college. So then your sport is basically just something you're doing as a hobby if you know it's not going to work out as a pro career, but you have that other plan, you have that other plan set, you have another job set, so everything's in place. And I think that's the big thing about high school NIL if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like the pace of how it's moving. It's moving fast and slow at the same time.
Yeah.
Definitely it's taking storm like overnight of wow, this is happening, right? Like this is happening really quick. But the problem is that like the NC, they're one organization across the whole country. So whatever they say goes for every single school pretty much. And
Yeah.
so, it's at that Supreme Court level. And with the high school, it's a little more complicated. It's state by state because every
Yeah.
single state has their own sports organization. And so, right as we speak right now, not every single state allows high school NIL, but it's
Yeah.
looking more and more that this is the future of the NIL space.
Yeah, so like expanding off of that, Keaton and I have been pushing the NIL movement at the high school level, and we're going to be doing more research in the future. But conclusions we came up with are like in 2025 and 2026, we kind of are expecting this whole landscape of the high school movement to really expand across the country, and so it should be a big thing in the coming years. But getting back to that, I think an interesting question that I'll just like take an answer on first, and I'll let you continue off of is is it better for NIL to be controlled at the state to state level or at like the federal level in terms of how like the NCAA has done it? I mean, personally, I feel like the state by state is pretty interesting. I think that's the way to go. Really, I feel like if you have a federal landscape of how it should work, different states are going to try to like squeeze what they want out of NIL, and it somewhat can become convoluted. But I feel like if it's state by state, not I mean, there's good and bad. I feel like you'd be seeing how it is right now, where a lot of players are moving to like Southern California or they're moving to Texas or, I mean, other states where NIL might have different rules and landscapes that are preferable to the players. But at the same time, I feel like if you give each state the ability to really offer NIL and what they're comfortable doing, I feel like different players, it'll speak to them in a different way. But I know you come in from Wisconsin and how they're voting on it right now, and it's going like somewhat wishy washy. I mean, what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, well, I mean, they didn't pass it this year, so I think
Yeah,
they vote on it every year. It's definitely been a thing that's come up more recently.
yeah,
But I think on top of what you said about like controlling everything from a federal level of like having like a national high school sports association, I
yeah,
I mean there probably is something like that, but like I don't know how much control they have because each
yeah.
state has their own, organization that controls everything. I think it
Hmm.
would definitely be one of those things that would be bad for states like, like California or, Florida
Yeah,
or states with really big academies like, like IMG or, schools like that because it would really allow like the same rules everywhere, which would make it less appealing to go those places. But I think on the other side, I think there's more states that it would be useful for because it would help athletes like be more well known and it would be able to be a lot easier to compare teams to teams. So like it would really bring the potential of being able to play more state across state. And I think that would be a
yeah,
very cool aspect to the whole sports world in general. I know this is a little off topic, but I think it would be super interesting if they did that because you could have like a national ranking or like, and the winner of each state like battles it out at the end of the year and like you crown like a champion. Like I feel like that would be kind of cool to be able to like say like, look, there's a we've really mastered the state level, but can we go beyond and do like a national level? That way it's like, students don't feel like they have to go to an IMG to be scouted because that's what often happens is that, there's really good athletes at these small schools, but
yeah,
there's just not as much attention. But if their team's really, really good and they just are in a small state, like, being able to showcase their talents and their team's talents on a like national like would be very cool. And I know that states like California are already doing this on like ESPN and doing that,
yeah.
but I mean to really be able to expand would be pretty awesome. I don't know if that'll happen, but I would love to see it happen.
No, I think piggybacking off of that, something good that could come from that is, I mean, I know they have like McDonald's All American for basketball and those kind of bigger competitions, but like you were saying, even in like within the state, they're doing these competitions in terms of like maybe they have a tournament in Wisconsin or a tournament in New Jersey or these smaller states having their own like
Yeah,
tournaments,
like you
really
almost had
getting
like a
those.
regional tournament, and then
Yeah.
you would go on to like from regionals to like a national, and
Yeah.
and then play everybody, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah, getting those recruitment processes in. And I feel like not only would it be beneficial to have those regional or state by state tournaments, but really just to have a lot of, I wouldn't even say somewhat similar to how like the NBA draft has their combine, the NFL has their combine. I would if they do like state by state combines for like NIL and like get those brands out there and recruiters out there and really support the athletes. Cause like you were saying, that's how a Tyrese Halliburton will get spotted, or that's how someone in Maine could get spotted, or these smaller states given the opportunity for these players to get on the rise.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people would argue, well, there's things AAU or whatever, but the problem is that's just not accessible for everybody,
Yeah.
and it's expensive,
Yeah,
and
it costs a
so
lot of money.
so if high schools could really, produce this at a large scale and somehow get the funding to be able to do more like state by state, like, cross state travel to play other people for like a national championship in the high school level. And you could probably do it by conference. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you could do That way you could have a more universal scale of, oh, this athlete, I've seen him play
Yeah,
against other similar athletes. And rather than state by state, because it's almost too small of a scale. And then when you go to
yeah,
college, it's completely different because that's
yeah.
at a national scale and it's just not like matching right now.
The only thing I can see as a negative to that would just be I know with NIL expanding and everything, you see in college how there's these different tournaments that are coming up now that might replace March Madness in the near future in terms of basketball. You have these tournaments that I was looking at on Instagram the other day, and if you sign up and if you sign up to play in that tournament, you can win like each team will get like $1 million for signing up,
Mm.
and it's like a pay to. I mean, it's like an NIL tournament. You'll get paid to play, and that's kind of like what they're trying to do to take over March Madness. If they do that at the high school level, though, would you see these smaller states that maybe don't have the most amount of money getting like outbidded to be in these tournaments that could pay the teams the big bucks? That's the only thing I'm thinking of.
Well, I mean, but what I was thinking was, what if they had like each state gets one slot and the state
Okay.
champion from each state
Yeah.
gets to play. And so you have like a
Okay.
50-team tournament and the winner is like the national champion. And I feel like that would be really fun to watch and it
Yeah.
would definitely bring people together. I think that would also bring the NIL space to a whole nother level. Um,
Yeah.
it would bring high school sports to a whole nother level. The only thing is like the funding issue and how much these states actually have to spend is unknown territory for me
Yeah.
at least.
The last thing I'd say about it before we move on to the next topic is that it would be interesting to see where these players end up going in terms of if this tournament were to happen. You're going to have a lot of California players if they only have one team and then Wisconsin has one team. Players in Wisconsin might have a better opportunity at making that team where you're going to have a lot of good athletes at the high school level in
Yeah,
Southern
it kind of
California.
spreads the wealth a
Yeah,
little bit.
who can't even make it to the team, so they might to say, hey, I'm going to move over to this school in Illinois and compete for their team. And so you might see a spread of how athletes are living around the United States to make those teams, and it'd be interesting just to see how how like the rankings of players moves around the United States. And honestly, I think that's a really good segment into what makes the high school space so interesting. And
I
so
mean,
if you
I
want to add
think
on to that,
literally just what we were talking about is what makes the high school space so
yeah,
interesting, is the fact that there's so much opportunity for growth that, the opportunities are endless. I think in the past, high school sports have always been, okay, you do this, and then you go to state championship and then you're done. Where like I feel like there's so
now
much
there's no
more
yeah,
room like
there's
for
no fine tuned
improvement.
line.
Yeah.
No, it's before it was just a single line going straight up. You take the ladder, you follow the ladder, and that's the only way you can go. Now you can pivot this way, this way. I mean, there's infinite amounts of lines you can go into, and we don't even know the full scale of it. We've been doing tons of research of this over the past like 3 or 4 months, and we even feel like we don't have a very good perspective of how big this can be because we only know what we know now. But if 6 months from now there might be a totally different landscape that we didn't even know about, so it's a really interesting topic to dive down into.
Yeah, I think like also the first step to doing a more like federal like high school level would be to pass NIL and everywhere because
Yeah,
I think that's the problem is that the fact that everyone has different legislation makes it hard to play each other because everyone's got different rules. And so you
yeah,
have to be careful because you don't know, well, this state allows this and this state doesn't allow this. And so when if these teams came to play, the best way to do it is through like a club level right now, and unfortunately, like not everybody can play club because like we were saying is the pricing. And so I think that's
yeah,
what's really interesting about it is the money, where it's going, how it's moving, and what's going to happen with it in the near future.
yeah. And some of these athletes that may be listening to this might be thinking in the back of their minds, why does it need to be regulated in the first place? Why can't teams just offer what they want to offer and really get the most benefit out of NIL? What I'd say to them is that it would just be an unfair competitive advantage. You see Southern California schools, Texas offering like millions and millions of dollars that these smaller states just can't keep up with. And kind of how you're seeing in the NCAA space, lots of players will be going to these different high profile schools, and other schools just can't compete. And so, yeah,
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I don't want to go too far in depth in this, but
yeah,
what we've been working on is, well, obviously the NX1 podcast, but we're also trying to change the high school space ourselves and try to influence it in terms of NIL, like we were talking about how, really focusing on a local scale of how we can change it, like person by person,
Oh
and
no,
try to pass those legislation, try to make it, as available and accessible to everybody as possible.
we just want to teach people really what NIL can be of service to them. I feel like we were talking about this in the first episode and we touched upon it a little bit on this episode, but most of these players at the high school level just don't know about NIL and don't know what how it could be a benefit to them. Coaches don't really talk about it too much. Schools don't really talk about it too much because at the end of the day, they just want their players to focus on school, play for them, do what they need to do, but they don't really think about personal branding and marketing. And I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're here to educate, we're here to help, and we want to market you guys and really make you guys the next big targets for NIL. And so that's kind of a little bit of what we offer.
Yeah, I think, like he was saying, like just making it accessible to, everybody that we possibly can and try to gain as much outreach as possible. I think there's so many athletes in America, especially, that,
Yeah.
aspire to go that next level, but for whatever reason, sometimes it just doesn't work out. But I think there's like ways and definitely like space to have money be made for those people who maybe aren't like that tier 1 athlete, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we're here to do. We're focusing on all those athletes who would really get the turn of the shoulder or wouldn't really get looked at. We know that these top 17% of athletes are going to get those opportunities. People are going to come to them, but for the people who nobody comes to, we're here for you. We're here to help you out. We're here to market for you. We're here to brand. We're here to really educate you on the NIL space and really like make sure that you know what you can benefit off of. And we're also diving deep into getting you connected with brands, making sure that you know what the space is looking like, the different brands in your hometown, make you that little hometown hero if you are in a smaller town. If not, we're here to focus on branding. We're here to market you. We're here to make you kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, an ambassador to the point where these schools can't really let you go because you're going to be funneling in different students for them, different players, since you have that reach.
Yeah, try to scale your NIL valuation. I think that's something that not a lot of people know how to do, even at the collegiate level. And so I think since it's so new, I mean, I don't think like me and you really ever had the opportunity to learn about it,
No.
but
Yeah.
I think like it would be very valuable for, like even anyone in high school right now to even learn about it, going into whether you're a senior or a freshman. I think like it's a very valuable knowledge, and I think there's definitely a lot of information that just people don't know about. And I think it's important to, like he said, educate people on it, try to steer people in the best direction of, okay, I know this is here, it's going to be here to stay. How can I navigate it to best benefit myself and those around me? So,
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if this would have already come out in the past, you could still be playing soccer right now, and I could still be doing motorsport at our different universities. And I mean, we could be still really having a fun time doing that. We just didn't have the opportunity. We didn't really know about it, and we're trying to change that landscape.
for sure. Yeah. Do you want to just, plug in the mini
Yeah, yeah.
promotion real
So
quick?
yeah. So for all you guys listening, especially the athletes out there, we'd love to have you on the pod. Love to speak to you about your experiences with branding, how it's been going for you, what you wish the branding landscape would have, what you wish NIL it could have been at your school, or what you'd like to know. And we love to talk about it with you and really help you with your personal branding, help with that marketing, and help educate you on the NIL landscape. So if you'd love to come on the pod, we're going to be creating a Google form and we're going to be linking it in our Instagram bio. Again, NX1 Company. Look it up on Instagram. We'll be there. And so, where you can find our pod, we're also going to put a link down there for a Google form. Just fill it out really quick. It'll be maybe a minute max. And we're going to be sifting through those and picking some people to bring as guest hosts on the pod. And we'll be talking to you soon. So, appreciate
Yeah.
everybody for listening. I'll let Keaton, you close out. You
All right,
got it.
yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Can't wait to see you guys next week. Yeah, just keep educating yourself, just keep learning, and I mean, we will do the same and try to provide information as best as possible. All right, thank you
Yep.
guys.
Yep.
See
See
ya.
you next Sunday.